I love Metal Slug. It is one of my favorite series of all time. It has deep roots in the history of this channel, and it is a personal goal of mine to play through and 1cc every single arcade Metal Slug game over the next few years. But if we're being honest, if you are a big Metal Slug fan and you actually respect the legacy of the series, it's been some rough going for the past good while. Ever since SNK got bought out and the original arcade developers left and are no longer sleeping under their desks. Yes, the sprite artist really did that. Yeah, you're not getting anything in the same tier, in the same planet of quality compared to the original arcade work. And it's so dire at this point that I think the owners of SNK now would actually have better luck if they just hired ROM hackers to take Metal Slug and just mega mix together the ROMs and release new games. Those would probably turn out better than the type of crap they're putting out now. And so what the fate of a lot of these legacy IPs have been, it's not just Metal Slug, is that ever since the arcade era has kind of come to a close, the new IP owners, they're looking at it and they're saying, all right, how do we make money off of these franchises and not spend too much in the effort, right? Like, how do you get maximum reward with minimum risk? And usually the answer to this question is, all right, let's just put out mobile trend-chasing garbage, shovelware, basically, and people just buy it off the name and play it for an hour or two, or try to chase this mobile dragon and monetize the games that way. And so basically these legacy IPs are being pimped out. And then you're expected as a fan of the arcade to be like, oh yeah, this is the future direction of running guns is mobile. So I'm not a huge fan of this. And a lot of these releases, I'm not even gonna. They look so visually, it's not even worth the effort to play them in the first place. And so when I heard Metal Slug Tactics being announced, whenever that was, and discussed, I was like, oh boy, I'm sure this is another mobile sort of thing and all that kind of stuff. But the game comes out and lo and behold, it's like a real game with real developers working with real effort. And that brought up, I think, a really interesting conversation and kind of the focus of today's review, which is answering the question, how does one respect these legacy IPs in today's market? Because, like I said, the original developers are gone. They might be putting out some stuff that might be cool, hopefully. But in terms of SNK, they own Metal Slug. What are they going to do with this property that's respectful? And when I say respectful, I don't mean in the fan service type of way that people get all slobbery about now, where, oh my god, The Force Awakens, it's got stormtroopers and the Millennium Falcon. It's totally respecting Star Wars, or you see this all the time, right? That's the idea of respecting these days, is just throw in Easter eggs and fan service. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about respect in the terms of creating a product, creating a game that on its own merits can stand alongside the rest of the series and at least not being an embarrassment at this point. We're lowering the bars, but at least do not embarrass the series. And that brings up the question of spin-offs and what is the role of a spin-off, because spin-offs are a really interesting phenomenon in gaming and they have a really long history, because as much as it would be intellectually pure to say, spin-offs, forget that, those aren't really respecting the original vision of the franchise and stuff. Well, it turns out there are a lot of really good spin-offs if you think about it. For example, Ninja Gaiden, not only the NES title, but the character action version, which I am a huge fan of, that is actually a spin-off of an arcade beat-em-up. So spin-offs can be awesome, spin-offs can be great, but what is the standard for a game within a franchise, but it's aiming for a different genre? And the thing about it is, there is an effect to these. There is a connection. Spin-offs aren't a get-out-of-jail-free card, as some people seem to view them and discuss them like, oh, well, as long as it's not exactly the same, it can be its own thing. But there's the overall reputation of the franchise to consider. This is why I want to bring up this concept that I think is very useful, which is duty to quality. The idea being, if SNK is going to have some developer out there work on a Metal Slug spinoff, that spinoff needs to be of high quality, and it needs to meet the standards of just baseline presentation of the rest of the series. Another great example of a very strong spinoff is the Metroid Prime series. Metroid Prime and 2D Metroid have some similar design concepts that connect them together, but obviously they are still radically different games. But as a fan of the Metroid series, it's very easy to accept Metroid Prime into the household because it's good. It really just comes down to that in the end. Is it good? Does it fulfill the duty to quality? All the other sort of things people discuss and talk about as, oh, it needs to do this, it needs to do that. That's all great, but the key question is it good? And so with Metal Slug Tactics, I think some people might be a little bit surprised I'm covering this because it's a tactical RPG, and I usually cover arcade stuff, but I think this game does a lot of things correctly so that just because it's a tactical RPG in a different genre, I don't want the good lessons of this release to be overlooked. Because if you ask me, all right, would you rather have Contra Operation GACHA, which is a run and gun and in the genre of Contra, but of low quality, in my opinion, or would you rather have Metal Slug Tactics, which is a tactical RPG game with ambition that stands on its own 2 feet, that has a vision? I'd rather take that. Even though I personally like run and guns a lot more than tactical RPGs, I can see the merit and benefits of this game. And the first big one is this game's sprite art and overall graphical quality. Thank God this game looks good. I've been starting to lose hope because you look at the quality of the stuff coming out now. Remember the Advanced Wars remake? That was criminal. A lot of these cheaper asset store looking games, yeah, sure, they're high resolution, so you can see very clearly how they look. But here we go. We have something now solid, decent looking. It looks like it belongs in the series. I love the isometric perspective, which you don't get on the original sprite art. Now, is it as high quality as the arcade sprite art? No, but SNK's sprite artist was literally sleeping under his desk. This level of sprite art is among the greatest in the entire medium of video games. So that's a super high bar to reach up to. Remember SNK King of Fighters 13? Like, that's a very high bar for a modern developer to live up to. But they did a great job at pretty faithfully representing the game's graphical style in this new isometric perspective and great animations, nice and visceral. I love the way this game looks. And what's great about it is it raises that bar now, because now if Metal Slug Awakening type of game comes out now and I complain, hey, these graphics look like, the excuse of, oh, well, we just can't do good graphics anymore. Well, you got Metal Slug Tactics. It is possible. So that was a huge relief to me. And the initial reason why I even gave the game a shot, because I was like, all right, okay, at least it looks good. So we're on track here. And then I do like the way it uses the game's soundtrack and the sounds, and just very polished. That's a huge, big one for me. Another really great direction they took Metal Slug Tactics is they did keep that underlying arcade DNA by having it be a roguelike with permadeath. I talked all about this in my Permadeath video, why Permadeath matters. I'm really proud of that video because it connects, it makes the direct link between why is there such this interesting overlap between strategy players, roguelike players, and arcade players. We seem to be speaking the same language. And the underlying foundation beneath that is permadeath. Permadeath is a distinctive style of play that is how arcade games worked. It's holistic. You have to learn the entire route. There's real punishment. There's real consequences. And so if you were going to take a arcade franchise and translate it into some sort of modern genre, permadeath roguelike actually makes a lot of sense. And I also really like that as you go through the campaign, you can't stage restart, you can't go back. You have those 2 turn restarts in case things get a little janky, but those are limited, and then you're locked in. you're dedicated to what you have to go through, and maybe you used up your resources way earlier in the game and then you're getting your ass kicked on the final boss. I love that stuff. That's arcade stuff. That's you used up your power-ups earlier on in the stage, and then you get to the final boss and you just have a pistol and you're like, that's very Metal Slug. That's very arcade. And so this structure actually of using this roguelike template for the tactical design, I think is actually a great direction to go in. There are certain things that roguelikes do that I don't like that this game does as well, and I'll talk about that as we get further into the review, but I really like that they went with the tactical style of RPGs, which I think is just the superior style of turn-based combat, because it's all more fundamentally based on spacing and spatial awareness. Because when you look at the fundamentals of action game combat, you have two main skills that are being tested of the player. The first is spatial awareness, and the second is the player's timing and reflexes. You put those two together, real time, real spacing, and you get a fundamentally sound action game. What's really interesting with RPG combat systems is when they try to sort of incorporate action game elements into them, they often very much focus on the timing reaction element. Super Mario RPG, ATB in Final Fantasy, pretty much a lot of modern combat systems. A lot of that really revolves around timing. But what I think is more interesting and a cooler way to translate out action game fundamentals is spatial awareness. Ironically enough, whenever we talk about fighting game design and fighting game meta, what is the game everyone always refers to? Every fighting game content creator refers to and talks about? Chess. Chess, chess, chess. And the reason why is because chess is a game of spatial analysis, spatial awareness, a very complex game of spatial analysis. And I think tactical RPGs are a version of this with stats in there as well. But I like the fundamental basis of tactical RPGs a lot more because they test that fundamental skill of spatial awareness. And Metal Slug Tactics leans into this a lot by not only having you test your spatial awareness with the movement system, where the game actively encourages you to keep moving through the map to gain MP essentially and to gain defense. You're safer while moving around. And then it also has the combo system of the unit placement. And so what ends up happening is at the start of every turn, your team begins at a disadvantage. You have to earn neutral. You can't just cluster up your units on the high ground and hold position like siege tanks in StarCraft Brood War. Shoutouts to Terran. Instead, you need to actively balance keeping your units in motion while coordinating the positions of both your enemies as well as your allies, because physical space matters. In a really strong dynamic that occurs is trading off the risk and reward of attacking secondary targets to keep your path clear versus focusing on primary targets to complete your mission directly. This is why the boss fights of Metal Slug Tactics are a strong highlight of its gameplay. Not only are they designed in the traditional sense where you need to keep moving through the combat area, very much like a run and gun, but you also need to carefully manage the bonus mooks that the bosses spawn, again, very much like an action game. And what's really cool about the boss fights and the designated target missions is that the endless enemy spawns, especially in the higher difficulties, need to be accounted for. Otherwise, they will snowball together and overwhelm the player with no chance for escape. Very much like when in a bullet hell, you don't kill the enemies fast enough and then they spawn together, a giant avalanche of bullets to crush you. It's brutal in the best possible way.
Where's my opening? Where's my opening?
You put all of these factors together, the incentive to keep moving, the tactical RPG grid system, and then the combo system, and a lack of hard-coded weaknesses. That's also really cool. Then you add in the RNG on the enemy spawn locations, and you have a really nice dynamic system where even though it is turn-based, it is testing a lot of these same skills that you as an arcade player are tested when you're actually playing Metal Slug and having to react to enemy spawns and flying around all these different places. It's obviously not a direct skill set translation, but the concepts are there. It's a really cool way to translate action run and gun style into some sort of RPG framework. And it's not something that's as obviously trend chasing as, all right, let's make a twin stick shooter and make it Metal Slug. This took some thought. This took some creativity and some inspiration. And one of the major sources of inspiration, as I understand, is the game Into the Breach, which in itself is establishing a lot of really cool ideas and concepts when it comes to tactical turn-based RPGs and making them more immediate. And I definitely have to shout out today's tactical RPG advisor, Boghog, and he had a lot of great insights and answered a lot of my questions and thoughts. So shout outs to Boghog. This review would not be nearly as robust without his insights. And so if you take a step back and look at the overall goals and approach of Metal Slug Tactics, a game that focuses on replayability, a game that is single session, a game that has permadeath, a game that focuses on spacing and movement, even though it is turn-based, it has awesome boss fights and even a TLB on the highest difficulty setting. You have all of these elements and ingredients. It is a lot more faithful and I think representative of the spirit of Metal Slug than something like Awakening, where on the surface, yeah, Awakening, it's a run and gun technically, but it stretches on for hour after hour. It's riddled with gacha monetization. Its design, its graphics are, it's just this ugly pimping out the legacy of this series. You put these two side by side, which is healthier for the legacy of the series. Tactics, where I could see new players coming across this, playing it, enjoying it, and it could breed people saying, hey, this was cool. I've never really played Metal Slug before. What other games are in the series? I could see Tactics doing that service of introducing people to the series in a new way, in a positive way, because of its quality. Whereas Awakening, I shudder at the thought of people being introduced to the Metal Slug series through that title. And they walk away from that. You think they're saying, all right, Metal Slug, give me more. Let's investigate the series. That's the type of thing that is really damaging the legacy of arcade games. And I think this is why now a lot of modern players view arcade games as garbage. And it's painful, but also you can kind of see if these arcade game IPs keep churning out shovelware. Of course, that's what people are going to end up thinking about these series in the end. And so this is why I see Metal Slug Tactics as a healthy example of a spin-off title for an arcade series. Is it perfect? No. So let's get to the critique section of the review. My biggest critiques of this game are definitely its user interface, its controls, and its progression system. And so starting with the user interface, it definitely suffers what I like to call Western PC developer brain, where it relies way too much on texts and text prompts and prompts within prompts and text boxes in text boxes and just this huge visual clutter of words, and you can't even really read them on the Switch screen because they're so tiny. Let me grab out my reading glasses and magnifying glass to read some of these text prompts. It's very inelegant and functional. But what is great about arcade game design and being a spin-off of an arcade game, I think it's fair to hold them to this standard, is that arcade games need to visually convey their mechanics to you without the crutch of constant prompts and text, because guess what? You can't do that in an arcade game, and you can't even rely on the player to whip out a user manual and read. So one of the best strengths of arcade games that would apply to pretty much all genres, especially tactical RPGs though, is the clarity of their visual communication of their mechanics. But the game needs to, I think, more clearly communicate itself to the player instantly with its visuals. And there's lots of little nitpicks here and there, but some of the big ones is when you've expended all of your units' turn, essentially, you used up the attack, you used up the movement, you used up your MP, everything up, the unit should visually gray out. Not just their portrait, the unit sprite itself should visually gray out, just to help visually communicate the action of the game without having to constantly check. Same thing with the attack ranges of the enemies, rather than having you need to manually scroll over, okay, where's this attack range? Oh, where's that attack range? Oh, where does the attack range go after I move? All of these need to be, I think, more clearly visually communicated. I believe later Fire Emblem started to do this, and it looks great. This game needs to be more immediately visually palatable to help increase the pace, because this game is all about pace, right? It's all about a single sitting session. Pace is so important, and so if they could speed up the pace of the game significantly just by visually communicating the attack ranges and movement and stuff much more quickly. And then on top of that, there's kind of a lot of ambiguity when it comes to the movement of the characters. And there's a lot of times where I just am like scrolling around like, all right, can he go there? You know, it seems like it can. And again, this could all just be more clearly communicated graphically. And then especially when you get trapped within text prompts, within prompts, like there's been times where I'm in the shop and I'm trying to buy ammo or something, and I end up inside some sort of menu and I don't know how to get out of it, and I'm in this like vortex of menus. Going along with that, the controls of the game. I kind of get what they were going for, where they're trying to make the controls a little bit more action-oriented by separating things out by buttons. So if you want to move, you press A to move or whatever, and then if you want to attack, you use the trigger to attack. I get the concept, but the problem is that it is really messy and clunky at times, especially when menus start getting involved again and you go to attack and you just press A and then you're going back to the movement. You're like, oh shit, I meant to attack and I moved. So stuff like that, I think it could just be a little bit more elegantly integrated. And I think the fact that this does not have a control config is criminal. I understand it's probably a little bit funky because it's a tactical RPG for control configs, but the way it separates out navigating the menus with the D-pad, but then navigating around the map screen with the analog stick, that's clever. But the problem with that is, it's, in my opinion, I want to reverse it. I want to move on the grid with the D-pad, and then I can use the analog stick as a secondary to go through the menus. That I think makes a little bit more sense. And they could have had that be just toggleable between the two. You switch between them. And yeah, there's all kinds of weird control issues like that. I think they should go in and just patch it up and clean it up. Clean up the inputs, clean up the visuals, and for the love of God, clean up the performance of this bad boy. It is somewhat tolerable because it's turn-based. If this game was full-on real-time action game, it'd be a mess in terms of performance, especially on the Switch. How does a turn-based game chug on a Switch? I don't quite understand it, but it does. Like, I'm literally battling the frame rate trying to move my units on the Switch, and I think a lot of this is optimization. This game doesn't seem so intense and insane that a Switch wouldn't be able to run it when it can run like Doom and stuff. So I think they need to get in there and optimize it, especially on Switch and especially on deck and stuff like that, because that's how people are going to want to play this more so than sitting down at their high-powered PC. Because these tactical games, they thrive on handheld. I don't think I've ever played Fire Emblem on console before. Even the SNES ones, I emulate them on handheld. It's just the perfect place, the perfect venue for this style of game design. And so they need to get that performance working a lot better, in my opinion. And then in terms of the game's progression system, yes, I get it's a roguelike, and progression and randomization is all part of the roguelike formula, but I think they actually should have adapted it a little bit more to be centered towards an arcade philosophy. And the way they could have done that is simple. They could have kept certain elements of randomization, but then minimized others. So the element of randomization of the game that I think is really good and fits really well, it's like Psycho and stuff, is the way it shuffles stages and the way it shuffles enemy placements. I like that. I like that you can't memorize the game in that sense. You have to react each different time. That works. But the part that I don't think works in terms of randomization is randomizing your perks, your power-ups, and your skills and all that sort of stuff. That's very modern, spin the wheel roulette type of thing. It's a problem because if they didn't rely on that for replayability, what they could have done is brought in a proper scoring and ranking system, and that would have been just the perfect fit. And I know the arcade version of Metal Slug isn't great in terms of scoring. It's kind of broken with milking, but still, the concept would have been perfect if they brought in a scoring system. And so the replayability of the game, rather than having it kind of bottom out in the end after you unlock all the difficulties, and there's like 5 different difficulties, after you unlock all the difficulties and you beat the TLB, where does the replayability go from there? But if they had a proper scoring system involved, then they could reduce this amount of like randomization based replayability and instead keep the unit RNG, but then have scoring with consistent skills and upgrades so that you could route and plan them. And in the end, I think it would make the game a lot deeper. Because what I've noticed now, and this is my big critique of roguelike design in modern trends, is they get the idea of having replayability and the importance of replayability, which is great, but then they achieve it, I think, through kind of artificial, shallow means by just making some elements of the replayability come down to luck and chance and that whole like gambling factor, versus if they focused on making the scoring elements of these games, well, adding scoring elements, one, but then making the scoring elements of these games reliable, and then you react to the RNG of the combat, then I think you could have got something really special and really cool. And as I understand, Into the Breach does have some scoring, but it's, not super deep. And then, of course, Advanced Wars also has some scoring. Not super deep, but still, it adds a whole lot more depth. And that, I think, is a system that would have fit so perfectly in this game. All the ingredients are there. And in fact, when you get to the end of a run, it even brings up this results screen and just statistically reports to you, here's all the stuff you did. But it doesn't assign these statistics any sort of value. It's just this empty dump of information. Whereas if they used all this information that they're gathering about your playthrough anyway, and instead of having it be empty performance metrics, instead created value, created risk and reward, and created dynamics within these statistics, then you could have depth and a scoring system. So because of this whole idea of randomizing perks and sort of loot boxy type of crap, even if there aren't microtransactions, it's really held back from that ultimate depth, in my opinion. And funnily enough, the very first Rogue game that inspired this whole subgenre has scoring. So in a way, this loot box progression is regressive rather than progressing the design of the subgenre. Another addition that would have benefited the game is if they added a randomized region as an option on repeated playthroughs. The idea of this region would be to take all the levels and boss fights from the other regions, shuffle them together, and then deal them to the player in a fixed sequence of 2 stages, and then a mid-boss, 2 more stages, and then a full boss, and then the player would proceed to the final area as they normally would. The point of adding this randomized region would be to give the player more variety of stages, but without forcing a multi-region run, which can go on for hours and kind of breaks the idea of a single sitting playthrough. But anyway, before I conclude this review, I have one last off-the-record critique of the game. And I say off the record because it's not officially a critique. Like, I don't think it's fair to say this is an actual critique of the game, but as a fan of Metal Slug specifically, I think this game did miss a massive opportunity, which is that when the game is completed and you've beaten whatever and unlocked everything, I think they should have made the original version of Metal Slug unlockable. And I don't say this for myself. I have Metal Slug on every device that can play games at this point. But for people specifically who are coming into the series for the first time, as a way to just give them a little bit of a taster of the arcade version of the game. And spin-off series used to do this, and I think it was effective. For example, Ninja Gaiden on the Xbox had the NES version of the game within it, and a lot of younger players, maybe who are into tactics games, they probably don't even know about the arcade version of Metal Slug. So that little Easter egg, I think, just would have been some great crossover for newer fans, maybe checking this out for the first time. If you look back, this method has been very effective for series before. Animal Crossing, when Animal Crossing on the GameCube actually had like those 8-bit NES games, balloon fight and stuff, Excitebike, and then again, Fire Emblem. Super Smash Bros. Melee doesn't have Fire Emblem in it, but remember the trophies of Melee and how a lot of those trophies ended up giving life back to some of these games because you like, oh, Marth's sick, he's one of my favorite characters. Where the hell is this guy from? And then you go into the trophies, Marth's from Fire Emblem. And that single-handedly like brought Fire Emblem back from the dead onto the GBA. So this kind of crossover stuff can be really helpful, and I do think it is a huge missed opportunity, especially because .emu published Metal Slug on Steam. I don't know all of the ownership licensing issues that might appear these days because everything's getting multi-issued all over the place, but it is a shame that the arcade version isn't available as a bonus, especially because in that hub area, the guy's playing an arcade cabinet, put it right there, it would have worked so well. But anyway, in conclusion, do I recommend Metal Slug Tactics? I do. I really enjoyed it. If you are a fan of beginner type of tactical RPGs, one could say, which I am, I like Advanced Wars, I like Fire Emblem, you're gonna enjoy this, I think, and the fact that it's Metal Slug themed and has inspiration from this series, I think is a fun bonus. I just think it's a strong example of what a good spin-off can do, and gives me a little bit of hope for maybe we could see something of decent quality Metal Slug-wise coming out in the future. Who knows? And so if you enjoyed this review, definitely check out my Permadeath video because it directly connects to the concepts in this video and connects together tactical roguelike design with arcade and the underlying connection between the two, which is permadeath, and it's a very important concept. And if you enjoyed this review and my work here on the channel, I would really appreciate you supporting me on Patreon because I am a full-time YouTuber and I need the Patreon, so I'd really appreciate that. Got lots of cool bonus content coming out now on the Patreon now that I am a full-time YouTuber. And Shmup Slam 7 is happening May 18th and 19th. I'll have the official announcement posted up here soon, but there you go. Real quick, Shmup Slam, come on out in Colorado, Akihabara Arcade. For the arcade guys, it's going to be a really fun time, and I'll explain more about all that later. Thanks so much. Adios, everyone.
So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100, Absconditis, Accepting Panda, Anhold, AJA, Alistair Stevenson, Alexander Pfeiffer, Anthony A, Arcade Hell, Arrow Viper, Au Ally, Autoname, Battle Mode, Beam Pit, Bo, Ben Foster, Beto Dames, Blade Symphony, Boghog, Board Bismati, Borgie22, Chad Memphis, Chase Palumbo, Jay Phillip, Christopher R, Chronic Burnout 3, Clara Cliff, Clay Binkley, Blimey Coyote, Coast, Cooksan666, Cook Some Soup, CSP 3900, Des Audio, DRK, Dan Matei, Dances with Incels, Darren Griffin, Dave Hansen, David Aldress, David Crespo, Dead Idun, Demian Smirnov, Desolis, Dimension Diver, Dingo, Dio Domke, Dio, DJ420 Praise It, Drano, Dr. Bosky, Duckies, Eduardo, Edvard, Elvin, Senesev, Eleanor Moon, Eliza Alonso, Eric Houdini, Eddie Zerker, Explosive General Games, Falcus, Fenich, Fiskin, Florida Sucks, Forbidden Dave, Frames Per Human, Francisco, Freckle Lord, Full Set, Game Soup, Game Boy Gru, Gojira Green, GPM, Gustavo Sanchez, Hawk, Hans Kowalski, Hausu, Hero Death, Ikihime, Han Harthy, HUD, Hugh Mungus, Jake Ryan, Jack Walsh, Jacob Grossman, Jacob Valenzuela, Jay McCarthy, J67, J Lab, JBRPG, Jimmy Striggins, Jake Hans, JMD, John Kelly, John Longwalker, John Simpson, Josaka, Josh Mayer, Julian Elwood, Jurgen, K, K2, Kane Evans, Ken 10082, Kill All Music, Kiskin, Kiss Kissian, Contain, Praise the Boys, Lingoblian, Ludwa, Alberta, Lord Harrington, Lorian, Mad Combaticus, Malaise, Mario Simic, Mark Sloan, Mars Bar, Master Xeon, Matt O'Leary, Matthew Woodford, Maz, Makaroka, Minong, Meester, Metal Slime Drummer, New Jam, Michael De Polito, Michael McCord, My Liddy, Mike Mel, Milo Chamel, Mr. Mamma Mia, Mitwid, Morog, Monroe, Miles P, Mishkin, Nathaniel Davis, NCR Trooper Scout, Nico Perro, Neon Dagger Games, Nervous J, Ogre Mode, Oakla Kugels, Patrick Baseman, Paul Jablonski, Paul Osterman, Powell Perot, Pedro Perez, Philip Plus, PLP, Poor Little Pigeon, Poorly Written Protagonist, PRK, Psycho Blizzard, Queen Charlene, Quinlan Yeager, R2 Sinus, Ralph Trujillo, Raul, Rapido, RC, Real Scheme, Brent Halt's Time, Retrojet, Retro Man, Retro Schmupper, Riff Mason, Rip the Jacker, Robert Chang, Rory Starks, Wolf015, Salmon Connections, Sam, San Nevo, Zarn, Scanline City, Seymour, Segfault, Shader Bunny, Chantech, Jazzy, Shift D, Shmup Junkie, Shmup Run, Zeropong, Social Kid, Spiders STG, Spongy, Steady AI, Stephen Bridges, Step Level, Steve Fiction, Street Magic, Superfunk, Swoop, Kamzarian, Taze Ryu, The Boot Rex, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Bensta, Thom McCarthy, Tim French, TK Productions, Travis Arbon, Troop Good Guy, Sugumo, Duram, 2YU, Twist Please, Twilight EX, Tyler Olu, Unicorn Roots, Ursula, Ushimushi, Vic Viper, Beautiful, Rena, Vulgarity, Wabby Legs, What Is This, Your Nerdy Joe, Zachary Patton, Zeal, and Zen Ryoku.